unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Welcome in. Pull up a bar stool. Some administrative things first. A quick update from my cat. I recorded this earlier in the day. Which is, I think, cat for I don't like a closed door policy. He doesn't like being locked out. My cat's name is Tomato, of course. All right, tonight's show. On tonight's show, people with psychopathic traits. You know, psychopaths. I'm thinking a certain boss, maybe a friend. Well, maybe not friend, but in-law. They feel less pain than you and I, assuming I'm not one, which jury's out. But anyway, when given electric shocks, they don't respond as badly as you or me. They have a higher pain threshold. And it turns out they assume everybody has that higher pain threshold. Could that be a reason that jerks are, well, jerks? Or is there something deeper going on? That we'll explore in about 10 minutes. And later in the show, a certain adult entertainment website that rhymes with corn flub, that's for flubbing corns, I guess, ran the numbers, and they claim up to 30% of their viewership who watch same-sex adult videos involving women are women who identify as straight. Maybe you're a straight woman, maybe you're married to one. So the burning question, why are heterosexual women so curious about same-sex adult entertainment? Why are straight women watching women? We'll dig a little deeper into this one. Could it be curiosity? Pleasure? Depictions in most adult videos involving men being produced, well, for men mostly? Answers we'll have as we go salacious later in the program. All right, a lot to cover tonight. Let's jump in.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
A quick public service announcement here. 2 words that should never be in the same sentence. DIY and surgery. Okay, DIY is an acronym that stands for do it yourself, but you know what I meant. I repeat, never take a do it yourself approach to surgery. Or you might end up like this man in India who thought, hey, if I can build a bike rack, I can probably remove my appendix. The man, 32 years old, decided he was done with stomach pain. And I guess done with common sense too. So he watched a few YouTube videos, locked himself in a room, and cut open his own body like he was spatchcocking a chicken for dinner. And yes, I just wanted to say spatchcock. 7 inches. That's how long the incision was on the lower right side of his abdomen. I've seen sandwiches cut with less precision. This guy didn't just go rogue, he went full Rambo. Except Rambo never needed 11 stitches. And yes, this guy did try to stitch himself up. He just sat there with a needle and a thread like he was sewing a sock. Or a sad, misguided tailor who thinks abdominal lining is just very stubborn fabric. I mean, it's one part stupid, but it's another part courage. Amazing, wild, misguided courage. Anyway, when the blood flowing out of his surgical wound didn't stop, surprise there, it turns out YouTube doesn't give out medical degrees. His nephew had to rush him to the hospital. According to the doctor, he'd actually gone on a shopping trip in prep for this operation. He bought a surgical blade, a needle, and something called a stitch cord, which sounds like something you might find at a craft store, not in someone's intestines, but I digress. It's like the man went to the market and thought, do I want bananas or suture thread? Why not both? Now, you might be wondering what police had to say, because this is technically a crime against both the human body and good judgment. The cops were informed and probably took one look at the case and said, you know what? We'll let the natural consequences handle this one. And some bad press might deter others. Now, the man had surgery for appendicitis when he was 14, but lately the pain had come back. So instead of, seeing a doctor like you should, he thought he'd take matters into his very own unsterile hands. Literally. He gave himself an injection, probably an anesthetic, though we can't rule out orange juice and hope. His family said after he was finished, He just walked outside and told him he was in pain. In pain! No kidding, buddy. You turned your own abdomen into a DIY art project. And remember what I said about DIY surgery. Just don't. If the pain was a surprise, that might be the most shocking part of this whole story. Anyway, he's unfortunately still in critical condition, now being treated by actual professionals, of which I'm sure are thrilled to clean up after YouTube University's latest graduate. So let this be a reminder. Just because you binge-watched 5 episodes of Grey's Anatomy doesn't mean you're ready to perform surgery. So stay safe, and please, for the love of your insides, leave the cutting to the professionals. And remember, DIY, surgery, never in the same sentence. Nothing good ever comes with the words Florida man, or maybe everything good comes with those words. Depends on how you look at it, and this time it ends with pig meat in your heart. That's right, a man in his 70s from Florida developed a life-threatening infection in his defibrillator after eating a feral pig. Feral pig. Sounds delicious. Maybe not so much. And by the way, when eating a feral pig, it's kind of a polite way of saying I took a bite out of something that looked funny at me in the woods. Now, the pig was a gift to the older man from a local hunter. Because nothing says love like 60 pounds of unregulated, possibly rabid pork wrapped in saran wrap and pride. The man cooked it up, sure, healthy way to go about it, but he handled the raw meat with his bare hands, possibly not washing them, which is what I do when I want to feel alive or gamble with sepsis or a staph infection. Now, what the man didn't know is the pig was harboring a bacterial stowaway named Brucella sui, which, assuming I pronounced that right, it sounds more like a French wine, but it hits you like a Russian mobster. The sneaky little bacterium bided its time, like a grudge held against a friend for not returning a wireless router after moving out of a house. I'm looking at you, Dan. And years later, it showed up in the man's chest, and with a vengeance. Now, it somehow made its way into his defibrillator. That's the tiny machine in your chest that keeps your heart beating on. Not that weird device you use to jumpstart your Camry. The infection slid through his chest wall and into his left ventricle, which, medically speaking, is not where a pork-borne illness should be. Doctors eventually had to rip out the whole defibrillator, which, let me tell you, is not something you want to do just because someone gave you a ham sandwich. This bacteria is a master of disguise. It hides inside your immune cells, dodges blood tests, and makes your fever come and go like a flaky ex. And if it finds a medical implant, it's moving in. It's the roommate that doesn't pay rent, won't leave, and occasionally throws a fever party. Out of more than 5,000 people with defibrillators over 30 years, only one had this Brucella bacteria issue. Which tells me this man is either extremely unlucky or the feral pig had a personal vendetta. The man spent years bouncing between hospitals, misdiagnosed, undertreated, and wondering why his chest was hardening like a loaf of sourdough. Finally, someone said, hey, maybe we just take the whole thing out, which frankly should be the first step in all Florida medical plans. Now, after a full device removal and 6 weeks of antibiotics that could possibly cure the bacterium, the man made a full recovery and even got a new implant. Hopefully one that doesn't get swine flu. Now, if you're listening at home, maybe don't eat wild animals is the moral here. Or at least wear gloves. And if someone offers you a gift feral pig, ask yourself, do I want dinner? Or do I want to be the subject of a bizarre medical case published in a journal called Emerging Infectious Diseases? Like what you hear, but you're not going to be able to be with us the whole night, or maybe you're going to miss a part of the program. Fear not, the last show is available as a podcast. Just head over to www.lastshow.pizza. That's .pizza, not .com, lastshow.pizza. And there you can find out how to subscribe, how to stream the show on demand, and our social media accounts. Give us a follow if you want. I mean, I can't tell you what to do. I'm not your mother. All right, you and my kitty cat Tomato are going to find out that because psychopaths feel less pain, they assume you do too. Maybe that's why they're such jerks and torture you and stuff. And when I say psychopathic, I mean the dark triad of psychological traits. We'll find out what those are and why, if you have a high pain threshold, you might want to pay attention to a few tips. Answers coming on the other side of the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The Last Show with David Cooper, where we apply quantum mechanical psychoanalytical astrotherapy to your problems.
Let's dig into those with psychopathic traits, sometimes called the dark triad of personality traits. It seems people who have them feel less pain and assume you do too. I'm here with someone whose study says that's perhaps why people with psychopathic tendencies can be, well, such jerks. Her name is Dimana Atanassova, and she's from the Donders Institute in the Netherlands. Dimana, thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the basics. How do you define psychopathic traits, the so-called dark triad that I often hear about, but every time someone explains it to me, I then forget?
Yeah, so the way we define psychopathic traits is these are traits related to manipulativeness, lack of guilt, lack of remorse. In general, these people tend to be a bit more aggressive, impulsive, and in many cases, they also tend to be a bit more antisocial. So we see a lot of violent behavior, threatening behavior, exploitative behavior, stuff like that. So that's how we define it.
I was going to crack a joke and say that's how my ex-wife defines me, but then as you started explaining them, I'm like, okay, I'm not that bad. Why link these traits in individuals with their ability to feel pain? Why were you curious about this?
So what we know about people with psychopathic traits is that they really, beyond just being more aggressive and engaging in more violent behavior, they really struggle with empathy. So they can't really understand how others are feeling. And the theory that I had in mind when I started this study was, and one possible explanation could be that perhaps they're not really feeling the pain themselves. Sort of like if you don't feel that, I don't know, stubbing your toe is everything, every pain that you feel in your life sort of feels like stubbing your toe on the corner of the coffee table, then you can't really understand why others would be so bothered by you being aggressive towards them.
It's kind of like being colorblind and not really understanding why an amazing piece of art that uses colors you can't see is amazing, or being tone deaf and not understanding why a symphony is so enjoyable. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. So what did you find when you started investigating this?
So what we looked at first was to understand whether those people with more psychopathic traits, are they feeling pain a bit less intensely than normal people do? And indeed, what seems to be the case is when you ask those people, and what I did in my study was I asked them to rate how painful various everyday scenarios would feel like. And then we used a bunch of laboratory measures to measure their pain sensitivity. And across the board, they really report pain as not feeling like a big deal. They're not really sensitive to pain. They don't think it's such a problematic thing.
You used electric shocks, pressure devices, and cold water that, so cold it could hurt somebody. Any study that involves those immediately I'm interested in. How do you get people to sign up for this?
Yeah, so when you put it like that, it does sound a bit like we are torturing them.
I mean, but if people are signing up,
Yeah, we actually had a lot of people interested in participating, which was great for us, but it is a bit of a, I think, red flag. However, I think for a lot of people, it is also kind of like a challenge. They want to challenge themselves and feel and see, are they more sensitive to pain? Are they, more tolerant of pain? Are they sort of like more, especially guys, they want to prove to themselves that they're a bit more macho in a way.
Yeah.
So there's no shortage of volunteers, which was great for us, interesting for society.
So lower pain sensitivity to electrical pain you found in people with these psychopathic traits. Why do you think electrical pain causes less of a, reaction in people like that?
So what I hypothesized and what my idea was is that so pressure pain and cold pain is something we run into on a daily basis. So for instance, where I'm currently in the Netherlands, a lot of people take cold showers in the morning, and there is this whole tradition of taking really, really icy showers. So the sort of like the value that we assign to pain that we encounter on a daily basis is different than pain that is a bit more scary. So when you say electrical shocks, people are imagining this, again, like torture chamber with horrible electrical shocks. And I think in general, electrical pain is a bit different than pressure pain or cold pain just because we assign a different value and we have different expectations for it. So it feels scarier.
Interesting. You suggest that people with psychopathic traits might assume others don't feel pain as they don't feel pain. Is that a form of empathy in a way? It's like, I think I'm like you. You wouldn't mind this, therefore I'll treat you badly. I don't know. I'm just trying to think why this might be.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea that we had in mind was exactly to test their empathy for pain as does it stem from their own lack of sensitivity to pain? Is it what makes them less sensitive to the pain of others? And we see this also across the board. I mean, other studies have also been done in the same field. And what we see is that this lack of empathy, this inability to empathize with others could be due to just not you yourself, not really imagining what pain would feel like for somebody else because you don't feel it that strongly.
And do your results confirm this theory?
Yeah. I mean, the way that we tested empathy in our study is a bit limited. So we just asked them to rate scenarios from their own perspective. So how painful do you think this would feel if you, for instance, cut your finger while cutting vegetables? And then we asked them to do the same, but imagine how painful it would feel for somebody else. So we specifically tried to get them to empathize, and we looked at how different the ratings were from the different perspectives.
I imagine someone listening to this right now thinks that they have a high pain threshold. They don't feel pain as others do. It might actually get them worrying. Am I a psychopath? Do you think it's possible to build empathy in someone who can't feel pain? Or are they doomed to have these negative traits?
I would definitely say it's not a doom scenario. It's not a fate thing. Because we do have people, for instance, people with chronic pain, they do tend to have, in some cases, really high pain tolerance and pain threshold, but we don't see them running around and committing crimes. I think what my study shows is that there is one pathway that could lead from you not feeling pain yourself or not thinking that pain is a big deal to perceiving the pain of others as being less serious and less severe. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you lack empathy or that you are going to just go off on a rampage hurting people.
Yeah. Often just talking about things that are problematic that we don't know about can help us. For example, if I've never had empathy to others because I have a high pain threshold, just understanding that others feel pain worse than me, can that help individuals who find themselves, I don't know, inflicting pain on others more than they might like?
Yeah, I think so. When we talk about psychopathy, we often talk about the fact that it's really difficult to rehabilitate those people, but sort of helping them understand that there is a different perspective than the current perspective that they have, I think it's a step in the right direction towards helping maybe reintegrate them better or rehabilitate them better or just reduce the amount of aggressive behavior that comes from them.
What else might you be interested in looking into in the future when it comes to psychopathy? There, I said it right, not psychopathy. Any other future research directions or any other questions that you're curious about that this study brings up?
I'm really interested in how do those differences in how we feel pain and how we empathize with others or whether we are more aggressive or not, what is their origins? What is the source of those things? And I'm really interested in the developmental roots of psychopathy. So why do some people end up becoming more psychopathic or developing those psychopathic traits? So this is something that I think is also quite important society-wise to understand what is sort of pushing some kids to develop more of those traits and become more aggressive compared to other kids. What are the factors and how can we intervene to help those kids before they've developed those dangerous for themselves and for others traits?
Interesting. So if I see my kid step on a piece of Lego and it doesn't hurt their foot, should I be worried? Should I try to intervene?
I think you should definitely ask your kid what's going on, if that's the case, or maybe try and understand where they're coming from. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that if your kid is not really bothered by stepping on a Lego, then that's definitely them becoming a psychopath.
As I hear the words come out of your mouth, I realize how silly it is. Regardless, Dimana, I appreciate you talking to me about your study. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Dimana Atanassova is from the Donders Institute in the Netherlands. When we come back from the break, the U.S. government has declassified 60,000 pages dealing with the JFK assassination. In it, a few bombshells, a few curiosities, and things you won't believe were going on in the United States, or maybe you would believe them. But regardless, they're startling. Revelations after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Smart, sharp, and slightly unhinged. Late night's fresh perspective. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner, and we would be remiss if we did not cover the document dump of JFK files that the current U.S. administration just released. In it, some surprising things. I'm here with Nathan Radke, a professor of cultural history.
Conspiracy studies.
Conspiracy study. Well, it was cultural history, and your partner Lee is political science, and then it's Humber College. Now it's Humber Polytechnic. Nathan, I can't keep track of you. Also, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Nathan's also got a podcast called the Uncover Up Conspiracy Cast. It's a good listen.
I agree. I listen to it all the time.
Okay, well, yeah, but while you're performing it, or then afterward do you listen?
A little of both.
Okay. All right, the kibitzing I would love to do with you, but there is just so much to cover and some really interesting things, including things that you could use to steal people's identities in these JFK files. But let's start before the recent document dump. JFK gets shot. I don't mean to spoil that for anyone.
Wow. Hey, come on. I haven't watched that show yet.
I won't spoil the end of The Sixth Sense, but he's been dead the whole time.
I've been meaning to watch the Zapruder film for years now.
And from day one, there's conspiracies. Then the guy who shot him gets shot. It's an assassination that is riddled with conspiracies. On the one hand, was it an inside job? Were the FBI or the CIA involved? On the other hand, was it the Soviets? Was it something else? Was it aliens? We don't know. At least we didn't know until these documents were released. And we might not know with these documents, but I'm just trying to get people excited here. Do you want to give me the high level of what happened, the Warren Commission, and the various documents we've had released to date?
Yeah, okay. So, you did a pretty good job of a bumper sticker version of one of the most complicated things to ever happen in American history. And people were understandably suspicious about these events at the time. And when we look back from where we are now, from what we know now, we're even more suspicious because we have a better idea now of the kind of shenanigans the CIA was up to back then, including, but not limited to, trying to create brainwashed assassins through the MKUltra program. So this is a conspiracy theory where I'm completely sympathetic to people who think there's something really strange and sketchy going on.
Well, I myself do think there's something strange and sketchy. I just reserve judgment until we kind of know. I can't let myself go down this road because once you go down the road, there's no going back.
Yeah, and they tried to kind of nip that in the bud with the Warren Commission, the official government investigation of the assassination, and it came to the conclusion, of course, that Oswald acted alone. But again, we know there was a bunch of problems with that commission. There was political pressure to conclude that Oswald acted alone, because any hint that the Soviet Union had been involved could have led to World War III and the destruction of the world. We know now that the CIA deliberately withheld information from the Warren Commission in order to ensure that the commission supported the hypothesis they wanted, which was, again, the lone gunman Lee Harvey Oswald.
There is some benevolence here. Like if the CIA knew that the Soviets did it, but they kind of worked behind the scenes. What's that line that the president has to the Soviets? There's like a line that the U.S. government has. It's a direct contact with the Soviets to try to prevent World War III.
Oh, yeah, the sort of little backdoor communications channels.
What if they called and they're like, look, we know you killed JFK, but we don't want to nuke you because if we nuke you, you'll nuke us and that'll be the end of the world. So let's cover this thing up. Like that, to me, there's some benevolence in that potential conspiracy.
Yeah, but of course, because there's a cover-up then, as soon as there's even a hint of cover-up, people are going to start speculating. And again, understandably. But you're right.
I have to interrupt. I'm not saying what I just said happened. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing, too, is that if we look at the actual assassination, there's a bunch of legitimate questions about this lone gunman theory. The number of shots taken so accurately from such a difficult angle on a moving target in a short period of time. Of course, the death of the alleged assassin, Oswald, before he could testify. The links that Oswald's shooter, Jack Ruby, had to the mob. And the weird links that Oswald had to the Soviet Union. Eyewitness testimony that perhaps suggests the possibility of a second shooter. And there was even a 1976 congressional investigation in the States that came to the conclusion that there was a conspiracy and a second shooter, although they didn't go as far as to name the group behind that conspiracy. So again, this one, totally understandable that people are a little bit sus.
That catches us up to the most recent document dump by glossing over, let's say, thousands of hours of discussing it. Trump, while campaigning, promises he's going to release these things. I think a lot of U.S. administrations have said they'd release stuff and then they continually kick the can down the road. But boom, we get a document dump the other day.
Yeah, did we ever? And what a dump it was. I mean, there was a ton of buzz about this release in the weeks leading up to it. Because, of course, as soon as we hear about, previously unknown files, it's hard not to imagine they're full of secrets and covered up information. But we have to remember that the CIA and the FBI are massive bureaucracies. And massive bureaucracies produce massive, giant piles of papers. And not all of it is interesting at first. And there's a lot of memos and letters and reports. They're filled with jargon and acronyms and code names. And a lot of these were bad copies of copies that were blurry and hard to read. But still, when it came out, we had 2,000 documents, over 60,000 pages. And it was like a little treasure hunt. We just knew there was some good stuff in there.
Side note, you're the kind of guy who would pour through 60,000 pages, and I love that about you. But can you use tools like AI to say, hey, take a look at this and tell me if anything funky's in there?
You can, and that's one of the amazing things about AI, one of the great promises of it. I still don't trust it entirely, especially for something as subtle as conspiracy theories. It's not quite there yet. AI still does have occasionally the propensity to hallucinate. And when you combine AI hallucination with conspiracy theory, that's like an explosive combination.
All right, let's get to some of the things that were in there. I don't know that we get any new facts in terms of who did it, but we start to learn things about like the CIA, the FBI's methodologies, programs that we'd never heard of, all kinds of weird stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean, tons of interesting stuff. Like you say, no shocking new revelations about the assassination. And a lot of the material in these documents had already been released in previous dumps. And because this one was rushed, the materials weren't organized in any way at all. They weren't organized by topic. They weren't organized by date. It was literally just a massive stack of files that was released out into the world. So it was extremely difficult to sort through. And then once we started sorting through it, we started realizing, oh, wait, there were some reasons why we should have maybe redacted some of this stuff.
For one, social security numbers. You can steal the identity of government staffers. You'd think they would block that stuff out.
For people that are still alive. There was also the real names of agents. There was the real name of assets. Like, this was not handled well at all, which is unusual because you would think that this particular government would do a really good job at protecting, secret information.
You'd think.
That's sarcasm.
No, I know, with the recent leaks of chat messages with, okay. Let's stay on topic. Mm-hmm. What were some of the methodologies that you were most struck by? What were some of the programs or things that you'd never heard of that were going on during these investigations and during the time of the assassination?
So I was going through like hundreds and hundreds of these files randomly, the only way to do it based on the way they were released. And because of the time period when Kennedy is assassinated, a lot of the material had to do with Cuba. Specifically, it had to do with something called Operation Mongoose. And Mongoose is something that we've known about before. It was an attempt to overthrow or assassinate Castro through some of the most absurd, ridiculous, cartoonish methods imaginable. Things like exploding seashells and poisoned bathing suits and beard defoliant, and spraying him with acid so that he would trip balls and not make any sense. Like, it was just the most ridiculous series of plans. So we knew about this before. But what was interesting to me is that these files gave us a lot more context and a lot more information about the CIA's involvement with Cuba in the early 60s.
When we come back with Nathan Radke, professor of conspiracy studies. I turned my stutter or my mistake into something more interesting there. When we come back with Nathan Radke, professor of conspiracy studies, we will cover some of these weird programs that were going on with the CIA and FBI at the time of Kennedy's assassination, including one, what did you say, contaminated sugar?
Contaminated sugar.
Including one that had contaminated sweets. It's going to blow your mind. It's Conspiracy Corner. We are going over the JFK document dump. And we will be back with more of this. That sign-off was among my best work, but we'll be back. It's going to be great. And our salacious topic later in the show, why so many straight women look at lesbian pornography. More Nathan Radke on the surprises in the JFK files after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Your nightly dose of unfiltered opinions and unexpected conversations. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Flawless execution there.
Flawless Execution, the subtitle, the second name of this segment, with Nathan Radke, professor of conspiracy studies at Humber Polytechnic in Toronto, Canada. It is Conspiracy Corner. We are going over some of the wacky revelations in the JFK document dump that the Trump administration just released haphazardly. There were unredacted social security numbers, agent names, all kinds of stuff in there that you wouldn't want the public knowing that isn't necessarily a secret, but like agent names, social security numbers of living staff. It was just kind of rushed, and that might mean it's a gold mine for things like we're about to cover. Nathan, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
All right, contaminated sugar conspiracies. I wouldn't even think to even come up. That's the thing. The truth is always weirder than fiction, isn't it?
Almost all of the time. So the context of this makes it make a little bit more sense, but not a ton more sense. As we were saying before the break, this was during the Cold War, and a big aspect of the Cold War at this time was the fact that we had the Cuban Revolution, and now you had a little tiny communist island just off the coast of Florida, which was driving the CIA absolutely batty.
Well, for good reason. They would then, want to move missiles there, Soviet missiles. Look, the U.S. and Cuba's relationship and the way the U.S. has acted bad over the years is not something I'm going to cover, but I could see why then they were worried.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Although, again, ironically, the fact that they launched all these ridiculous operations then contributed to the fact that Castro was more willing to have Soviet missiles on Cuba. So it was a bit paradoxical.
The contaminated sugar, though.
Okay, so I was coming across all sorts of weird plans having to do with Cuba. There was plans to sneak spies into Cuba disguised as students, to use frogmen to plant explosives in Cuban and Soviet ships to blow them up, to starve the Cuban people by sabotaging their rice crops. These are pretty legit serious programs. And there was also this one passage about the CIA had already, this wasn't a plan, this is something they had already done, contaminated a shipment of sugar from Cuba to the USSR. Quote, "The contaminant we used will give the sugar an eradicable? Eradicable.
Eradicable. Oh, nice
eradicable.
Word. Word of the day, eradicable.
The contaminant we used will give the sugar an eradicable, sickly, bitter taste, which no process can remove. The contaminant is not, in any sense, dangerous to health."
So they're just ruining the Soviets' coffee? Like what?
So, yep. But again, this was the Cold War, right? Every possible plan, every possible arena that they could fight in, they were going to fight in. If you could ruin a Soviet officer's breakfast by giving him some sour tea, that's going to be on the table. Anything that happens, they are going to be behind it, and they're going to be doing it.
Think about it. If the KGB headquarters can't put sugar in their coffee, not every Asian is going to want black coffee because, maybe that's not to their liking. And if the sugar's bitter, they're not going to get their morning coffee. They're not going to plan as good operations as the CIA. It's a foolproof plan.
It's brilliant. You are effectively shortening the workday of the KGB. This is a magnificent idea.
You are winning the Cold War, one bitter granule of sugar at the time. Any other programs that were just way out there? Any other things that, it's not that it necessarily had to do with JFK, but it's wow, what was the government doing at that time?
Well, a lot of it was kind of embarrassing because there was a lot of files that they had nothing to do with Kennedy's assassination, or at least nothing obvious. But they would be embarrassing for American intelligence services because it showed the degree to which they were manipulating and interfering not just with the Soviets, but with American allies, which at the time, if it had come out, would have been quite shocking. I came across a plan to use covert methods, to use secret spy methods to prevent Canada from selling nickel to the Soviet Union. So that is basically CIA sabotage against a friendly nation.
Oh, wow. The U.S. Making bad gestures towards a friendly neighbor nation. Who'd have thought?
I know. I was shocked by that, too. There was a bunch of evidence. Again, this isn't so surprising from where we are now after the Snowden revelations and things like that. But there was a lot of evidence in these files that the CIA was surveilling and even working against American allies as well as enemies.
Doesn't surprise me at all. It's the kind of thing where it's I just don't trust them. I don't know what they're up to, and I'm not going to think they're spying on me or, watching me go to the toilet or whatever, but I don't trust them, and it's because I know what they're capable of, and I know what the history of it is, and It's this weird thing. It's like, there's bad actors in the CIA. You don't know what they're doing. If you make a guess, you'll be wrong. And so you can't live your life suspecting it. You just got to try to be as normal as possible. But then when you hear these things, are you really that surprised?
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is that there were some references to Lee Harvey Oswald. The CIA, for example, was confident that the KGB was confident that Oswald had never been a KGB asset or agent. It's kind of interesting. But also, these files reinforce the fact that the CIA had an interest in Oswald before the assassination. They were already monitoring him. And this is understandable. This was a character who had defected to the Soviet Union, defected back, had a Russian wife, was actively pro-Castro. But it does raise the question, could the CIA have prevented the assassination if they had been working more closely with the FBI? Were the CIA completely incompetent when they were following around Oswald and his plans? Or, and this is where conspiracy stuff comes in, was it something worse? Was it something more sinister? Did they have an interest in having Oswald at large?
And the very fact that they had an interest in him, whether they put him up to it or not, or whether they knew about it or not, they would want to cover that up.
Yeah, exactly. And so, again, there were things in this that were worth covering up by the CIA because they were embarrassing. It just wasn't the bombshell JFK assassination stuff that people were looking for, although I did find something of a bombshell.
Does it have to do with birds maybe not being real? Like flying birds.
I should have said I did find something of an eggshell, because yes, you are correct.
Let's high level on birds aren't real. I thought it was a joke because I live in New York City. They protest at Washington Square Park. They have signs saying the pigeons aren't real. And I got to say, the people are out there, it seems like a bunch of university college kids. It's like a drinking club. Like they're just joking. They're just, with the things they say, it's like parody. But there is this like, from parody real conspiracy that they suspect that birds are like robots or drones and aren't real. And this is very funny to me, and I think funny to a lot of people, but there's something to do with that in these files.
Yeah, I mean, the birds aren't real conspiracy started out as something like an art project or a joke, exactly as you say. But it's really hard to satirize a world as strange as ours. And so I want to read something that was in these files from an early 1970s memo, and I quote, "Birds have been trained and tested in the United States to carry small intelligence-collecting packages, such as audio surveillance devices, small cameras, and current measuring devices. Any data collected from unwitting domestic sources would have been used only for engineering purposes and then destroyed."
So they tested a program to use spy birds, but they're saying, we didn't actually use it to spy.
Yeah, although they are also saying that they did collect information. They collected data from unwitting domestic sources. Now, first of all, the CIA is not supposed to be spying in America at all. That is not their purview. That is not their mandate. So already that's an issue.
But they've got to test out their tools, and who better than the people of the country? And do we really trust them not to break the law?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, we already knew about Acoustic Kitty. We already knew that the CIA had built a cat that they had put listening devices in. But this is taking to an entirely new level. So, yeah, in the early 1970s, there were CIA spy birds flying around the United States with tiny current measuring devices, small cameras, and microphones. That is just a thing that is real and happened.
Well, you heard it from Nathan Radke, professor of conspiracy studies at Humber Polytechnic. Birds are not real. They've never been. They've never existed. That's exactly what you said. I quoted you exactly.
Excellent. I hope that's on my gravestone.
Nathan, thanks for going over the JFK document dump with me. I appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Check out Nathan Radke's podcast, The Uncover Up Conspiracy Cast, where he covers conspiracy theories. Do check it out. It's available wherever podcasts are streamed, downloaded, played. I never know what to say there.
All of those.
All of those. All right, things are about to get spicy as we look into the statistics behind what straight women watch when they go for adult entertainment. And spoiler, it's not straight videos, it's lesbian videos. So we'll dig deep into the why, because I know you're curious on the other side of the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
Content warning for what you're about to hear over the next 10 minutes. There'll be adult themes, discussion of the adult entertainment industry, sexuality, and sexual language. It'll all be in an academic context, but for any sensitive listeners or parents with young kids, listener discretion is advised.
The show that asks the questions other shows are afraid to ask. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Research shows that straight women, heterosexual ladies, when they do consume pornography, it's often lesbian porn. Why is this? Certainly it's a fun, salacious statistic, but I'm here with a researcher who asked why, who asked the deep questions, and didn't just stop at the answer, just curious. But what could this all be about? Pleasure? Power? Or because men depicted in adult films never do the dishes? I'm here with Rotem Avgar, a gender studies PhD student at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. Rotem, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I have noticed when talking to straight women who are friends that they do watch a lot of lesbian pornography. And I've always been curious about this myself without jumping to any judgment. I want to start with the obvious question. You probably get asked a lot. What got you curious about this? Why look into this at all?
Yeah, so this whole began almost 10 years ago when I was an undergraduate at the Ben-Gurion University in the gender programs. And I took a seminar about pornography, and I'm a queer woman and I'm a feminist woman. And I was like, I know what I'm having here, And I didn't. And I was surprised to learn a lot of things. But one of the things that got me was when I wrote my final paper. Some information jumped in front of my eyes when Pornhub, a website you might have heard about.
I have heard of it. Yeah, I did some research for this interview, so I have heard of it.
Yeah. So some people have heard about it, and it also has a statistical blog, so to speak, I think, that's called Pornhub Insights. And if I'm not mistaken, it was in a collaboration with BuzzFeed that they published this paper saying straight women watch lesbian porn, And I was like, okay, let's see. Or a lot of women watch lesbian porn. And I started digging into the information that they have there on Pornhub Insights. And I saw that repeatedly, year after year, the lesbian category was the most popular among women at large. And I was expecting this kind of material, lesbian porn, quote unquote, that's on Pornhub to be really bad. But because I was writing a paper about it, I just had to watch a couple of films.
Yeah, just for the research, right? Of course, just for the research.
Yeah, for sure. I had to. And I was surprised for the best. But I was like, this isn't horrible. As a lesbian woman, I was like, okay, interesting. Something interesting is happening here. And I started digging into that category, not specifically a queer, feminist, alternative kind of porn, but this mainstream area. And I've heard more and more about women who watch it, and the numbers are so high because, as we mentioned, some people have heard about Pornhub and millions of people go in there every day. And they say that roughly 30% of them are women. And then I don't think all of them are queer. I started looking into it and I saw that there are more and more articles written by straight women who say, I'm a straight woman and I watch lesbian porn,
Yeah.
And this is why. And I was like, why? Why? I'm a lesbian woman. I watch this porn. I say this is nice. They're attractive women. The sex is good, whatever. But reading more and more of these articles, I saw that they say some common things, and the rest is history because this is where I stayed since.
It's often said that pornography is produced sort of for the male eye, from the male point of view, for the male, sexual interests. Are you finding that's always the case with lesbian pornography, or is perhaps that the reason that lesbian pornography is produced with more of a general idea of authentic pleasure and not just, I don't know, boom, 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 whatever we associate with heterosexual, couples having sex on camera.
Yeah. So I think that's the point and a point, because first with the women whom articles I read, I saw that maybe not surprisingly, a lot of times they didn't speak about lesbian porn, about the lesbian porn that they watch as this amazing thing, but as something that is better than the mainstream heterosexual alternative. The recurring themes I found was focusing on women's pleasure, something that they didn't expect to find on the heterosexual mainstream content, and yes, authenticity. They said that the pleasure that they saw or expected to find there is more authentic.
What does authenticity in pornography look like as it comes to women who are talking about this stuff?
Yeah, so in this sense, they talk about something that leads to a reaction that I can believe, as a woman who is watching a porno and looking at a woman experiencing something, I say, this moaning, like these moans, they do not reflect what she is experiencing right now.
Yeah, it's performed. It's totally exaggerated. It can be, at least.
Yeah, but not just volume-wise, but what led to this? How long did it take? They say if the partner didn't stimulate her clitoris, then she wouldn't start moaning at this point, or her orgasm came 30 seconds into the film. I don't believe that. So they gather actual criteria that will allow them to believe this pleasure. And I will say that they are critical, It's not like they're 100% for sure. If two women have sex, it means it's always amazing. But if I see a certain act, a certain practice, if there's a certain amount of time that will go before I start hearing and seeing her enjoying herself, then I believe her. I find her pleasure more authentic.
And so does lesbian pornography sort of include that build-up, include kind of a long period of time of kind of building up to it rather than, I just touch you for 30 seconds and you pretend to moan? Is these the kind of depictions that women are finding more authentic than what they're seeing in straight pornography?
Yeah, so this is what they expect in a way, when they think about lesbian porn from their experience, be it maybe they saw a lot of porn, maybe they haven't, but they expect to find this in lesbian porn, and they don't expect to find that in the mainstream heterosexual one, for sure.
Fantasy and curiosity, could those be motivations behind straight women watching this kind of pornography? They're just curious about what it might be. They have fantasies about what it might be, although their kind of core identity and the kind of relationships they want to have are straight. But that internal fantasy, could that be a reason why?
Yeah, for sure. You are feeling that, because this is the fifth, I'll say, theme that I found, curiosity, fantasy, experimentation. They saw this content or the sphere of watching pornography, as a low-risk way to test things out, And maybe, as you said, they relate to the straight label. They find themselves more comfortable with it, but it doesn't necessarily mean they don't find women attractive or don't sometimes wish to have sex with them. So this is a way for them to check it out, to kind of imagine themselves there without, at that point, actually being in front of another woman and testing it out like that,
I am here with Rotem Avgar. She did a study looking into why straight women look at lesbian pornography. And one quote from this study really stood out to me. And it's, "Boys just ruin it." We'll come back with why one straight woman said that about heterosexual porn as we continue our conversation after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
Content warning for what you're about to hear over the next 10 minutes. There'll be adult themes, discussion of the adult entertainment industry, sexuality, and sexual language. It'll all be in an academic context, but for any sensitive listeners or parents with young kids, listener discretion is advised.
Explore your deepest desires, if you dare. The Last Show with David Cooper.
The research has been done, and straight women watch a lot of lesbian pornography. Are you curious why that is? I was too. And so was one researcher who is here today. We're discussing where that curiosity from straight women comes from, why some heterosexual women are not so into heterosexual adult films, and what women are saying about it. I am here with researcher Rotem Avgar, a gender studies PhD student at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. Rotem, thanks for having this chat.
For sure, thank you.
One quote from your study did stand out to me, and it's that boys just ruin it. And I kind of love what we're about to unpack here, because I do think most straight pornography is like really, really catering to what these directors, what these companies, even what these actors think men want, and kind of disregarding what women want of any sexuality. Can we unpack that a little bit?
So yeah, I'll say that this paper is based on one research analyzing the texts written by women, straight women who watch lesbian porn or about them, and analyzing films from that category. But my current study, my PhD study, is actually based on interviews with women who watch lesbian porn. And I'll say that this tension is always there for them. They know, and I think it's also present in the articles that the paper is based on. They know that they're not the imagined audience many times. But they strategize to feel more as if they are. So the same with the criteria to believe the pleasure, then they curate, a content that they can enjoy and that may feel more as if it had them in mind in different ways.
Now, that quote, boys just ruin it.
That's actually from one of the articles written by straight women who watch lesbian porn. And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually the headline. And I thought it's perfect.
Yeah.
So reflective of this thing that's happening here with women who may be sexually attracted to men, maybe want to be with men. But when it comes to sexuality and when it comes to porn, if a man will enter this space, the focus will be on him, or the acts will be something that maybe is more pleasurable for him, So I won't be that thing anymore, and I want to be like I'm coming to what I'm here to watch this porn as the viewer. I don't want to, feel like I'm intruding to someone else's party.
I want to move on to this. There are those that would hear about this study. I'm not one of them, but there are those and would say, wait, does this mean that many women are secretly gay? What does your research have to say on this? Something to address somebody with that point of view.
Yeah, so I think this is the minute where, as a gender student, I must state the basics, which is perhaps but it depends on who we call gay and whose authority it is to say someone is either gay or straight, and what are the boundaries of the category. And for me, and this is again based both on this study and the PhD one, some women who understand themselves as straight and again are most comfortable with this label don't find it as excluding some sort of desire to women, and luckily I think they seem pretty comfortable with it. So I'm glad. And some of them might at some point be like, you know what, this is a part of maybe understanding myself differently, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a gender studies student. I'm not well educated on this stuff. But for me, it's like, okay, you get to choose whatever label you want. And you get to choose how you live your life. If you want to have an exclusively straight sex life and occasionally watch lesbian porn and identify as straight, why would that bother me?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of my view on it. Let's get a little silly for a second here. If there was a Pornhub that was designed for women by women, What do you think it would look like? What kind of categories would it have? What kind of insights would we get that is completely different than what we're seeing today?
So I think, I don't know if it will come as much of a surprise, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the structure of the page itself, like the how the website is designed, because something that a lot of women hate is all the pop-up. Again, I don't know if you've ever been, but like
Yes, Rotem, I've been, okay? Is that what you want to hear? You mean like the in-your-face, just like boom, pop-up, explicit, from 0 to 10 or 0 to 60 right there?
Yeah, and without even choosing, for me, when I personally am on Pornhub, I'm in the lesbian category, and there's like heterosexual intercourse taking place, or intercourse might be a bit underwhelming to what's happening. But, on the side, I'm like, why am I targeted with this right now, So some women don't want to see, let's say, penises or something. And they do when they go on the website, even if they try to get to a different kind of content. And I think that will be very different in woman-led Pornhub. About the categories, I think many of them will be, like the categories themselves will still be there, because some women want, something that's more quote unquote rough, and some want something that's more quote unquote pleasant, and they would like BDSM, and they would like gay porn and lesbian porn, etc., etc., etc. But they don't necessarily enjoy the films, like the videos they find under these categories on mainstream websites.
You and I are pretty open people, Rotem. In my research while chatting with my friends, I came across a straight friend, a woman, who does this, who does watch lesbian porn and identifies as straight, but carries a lot of shame around it. Didn't think it was just something they could volunteer, barely wanted to talk about it with me. After they discussed it with me, they're like, don't tell anyone. What advice or recommendations would you have to someone like that who has been curious about watching lesbian pornography? They're a woman, but they're carrying a lot of shame about it.
Yeah, so I think first, understandable, and talking about it openly might really put to the side the fact that a lot of people don't, and women for sure, don't feel comfortable sharing this kind of information about themselves. And being a woman who watches porn is complex in many ways,
It's not the best industry in terms of the way the workers are treated always.
Yeah, exactly. And women carry that with them. Again, my interviewees, this is something they discussed, like all of them talked about the ethical part of it, and how to feel like they're not harming or contributing to harming women who take place in that industry. And it's complicated. And again, many times they don't feel as if they are the ones addressed, so you feel like you're out of place. So for people like your friend, I will advise reading about it, because there's been a lot of work done in this field, women writing about porn. The feminist movement is not just against pornography, and there's a lot of writing that's looking at it in a more complex kind of way. And also, I think that the fact that she is watching lesbian porn as a heterosexual woman shows to such high literacy in a way, sexual literacy, digital literacy, and self-investigation, that maybe the fact that she opened up a bit about it talking to you is like a route to talk to more people around you. Because again, I didn't know, like, even though I was a gender studies program student, even though I'm a feminist, even though I didn't know that straight women were watching lesbian porn. And then once I started understanding that, talking to other women, they were like, yes, yes, I'm doing that. My friends are doing that. So once again, understanding that you're not alone in something is can be supportive. So I hope maybe this study helps a bit.
Rotem Avgar is a gender studies PhD student at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. Rotem, thanks for sharing your study with me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Up next, what does it mean to find your calling in life? Have you found yours? Well, we'll have one writer of Hallmark romantic comedies on. So how to find your calling and what Hallmark movies have to do with it? Coming up next, I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show.
We're here because your heightened awareness deserves heightened entertainment. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hallmark movies aren't just for your grandmother's couch naps or your Christmas cookies. I'm here with Zac Hug, who writes them for a living and teaches you how to do it too. So how does someone fall in love with writing love? Zac teaches writing at the University of British Columbia. Zac, welcome to the show. I'm excited to talk romantic comedies.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So what makes a good love story work on the big screen, and why does that matter so much to you?
I mean, it matters to me because I think, falling in love is the thing that I hope everyone gets to do in their lifetime.
Aw.
It doesn't happen to everybody. It's not something that everyone gets to experience, but I like that, I don't know. I like writing about it because I also genuinely believe there is a lid for every pot. And these stories are about that. These stories are about two people who are not in each other's sphere. They come together, they ruin each other's lives, and then they actually make each other's lives better. And I think that's a good model for how we should be living in this world. If someone comes into your life and can improve it, take that chance.
Fair enough. Let's talk about you. You started off writing Shadowhunters, and then how do we go from that to writing Hallmark Christmas rom-coms?
I had a terrible idea for a rom-com that I don't know why, I'm not a generally religious person, but I've always sort of loved the story of the three wise men. I would sit in church as a kid and be like, who were these jokers? And the more that I thought about it, the more I thought maybe that's an interesting Christmas movie if they're brothers and they have to make it across the country. And I pitched it to a friend who was in the Shadowhunters writer's room with me, and she said, my sister makes those movies. So I made that movie. I wrote it. It was called The Road to Christmas. Chad Michael Murray and Jesse Schramm. It was about a woman who had to get these three brothers across country for their mother's Christmas. She was kind of like a Martha Stewart figure, the mom. And from there, they just kept hiring me. It turns out I never thought Christmas movies would be my thing, but I was, in fact, born on a Christmas tree farm.
Oh my God, you and Taylor Swift alike.
Yes. Yeah, we're buds that way.
The world is often chaotic and heavy, and you've said that rom-coms are kind of like bleach or a rest for our brain. Do you think that kind of art or consuming that kind of stuff is essential, especially like with what's going on right now in the news?
I think so. I mean, I think whatever it is that allows you to rest your brain, we are taking in so much information all of the time. All of us, we're inundated, and these movies particularly are kind of meant to give you that rest. And I think that for me, that's, I like to cook. I like to go jogging. There are things I do to sort of get my brain to kind of stop consuming news and worries in general agita of the day. But for a lot of people, getting to sit for 2 hours with just a couple of goofy kids falling in love, I think that also, it's comforting. It lets you rest. And that I'm really proud of that. I'm really happy to be able to provide that service, is what I'll say.
No, I completely agree. I don't particularly watch these. My girlfriend does, but I watch like Frasier before bed. I watch, Seinfeld before bed. I watch these like, light, softening pieces of television and movies, and they're essential, and I love them. The other day, I brought a quote onto the show. We were talking about a heavy topic, and it's a quote from a cartoon that deals with depression, BoJack Horseman. And the quote is as follows: "Every happy ending has the day after the happy ending," which is kind of like a dark and ugly quote. It's like, what about that? Like that day after the rom-com ends? The stories, I feel like, don't ever capture that.
No. Well, I think, you're watching them for, your job when you're watching these is to not have a job. Your job when you're watching these is to sort of believe there is a happily ever after. And I will say, I do believe that people do get generally long periods of happiness if sometimes things conspire to make that happen. And it takes a lot of work to do that for some people. And I think this gives people the opportunity to at least consider that happiness is possible if it's not part of their lives right now. I do think, what happens after these movies? You got to go back to paying the bills, and you got to go back to, some things are tough and you may not like your job and all those things. But I do think that partnership or relationships or these things that when they are good, and these movies really do give you a sense that it's possible to have someone who is not necessarily meant for you, but works with your particular brand of you, that the two of your crazies match or your happinesses match. And I think giving people that amount of hope lets them actually start to see it in themselves. And I think that can be really helpful and powerful.
I do too. I suffer from clinical depression, and when I'm feeling low and down and unhappy for long periods of time, one of the things I lose is my imagination for what happiness could be. And so you're kind of providing that. You're giving people a script for what happiness could be.
And look, at the end of the day, they're fantasy, and we know that. We know there's not a lot of conflict in these movies, or if there is, it's kind of a lower stakes conflict, and at the end, there's joy. And we know that life doesn't work that way. And boy, it'd be great if it could.
Yeah.
And I think that imagination is really something that we're all lacking. I think we do not imagine a positive future for ourselves. It's very hard to look for one. And I think on behalf of the collective imagination, that might be a failing of ours, is to be enabled to sort of say, hey, we could solve every problem. We could cooperate rather than compete. And here's a world where that happens.
Tell me about teaching romantic comedy writing to people. What does that class look like? And at the end of the class, what are the students getting out of it?
I'm always astonished at the ideas people bring, because you get the sort of, basics, stories. Guy meets girl, it's Christmas. And then one guy brought in a story where it was two people who were falling in love during a zombie apocalypse. And I thought, yep, that's great. You get to be funny. Right? The thing about romantic comedy is that there's comedy in there. That falling in love is messy. Falling in love is, it represents the best sides of us and the worst sides of us. We turn into absolute fools when we're falling in love. And there's something so much fun about that is so vulnerable. So in teaching it, you just ask people to imagine themselves at their goofiest. And also, it's really important to people. Right? Who they love, who we choose to be with, that is a huge decision. And I think getting people to sort of examine that in themselves and find the truth of what it is that they have to say about love, that's enormously rewarding to watch in a classroom setting.
I found my calling in radio, in long format interview, in short, by trying a lot of new stuff. One of those things is stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy led me into wandering into a radio station and realizing, oh my God, this medium is for me. I found my calling by accident. You said that creative writing is your calling. For people still searching for theirs, for their thing, what helped you find yours, and what do you recommend people do?
I recommend people complete the thing. This is kind of one of the harder parts of teaching writing, is that people want to be really good at it before they finish the project. And I find that the more you finish a project, the more you learn if A, it's for you, and B, how to make it good. That the answers to doing something well are not in rehearsing tiny bits over and over again, as much as it is looking at the whole of it. It is much more important to see the larger picture for yourself. That, do I belong in storytelling? And where do I find my sense of storytelling? I know a lot of really smart people who start as actors and find themselves as writers. I know a lot of people who start as writers and find themselves as directors. Uncovering what it is about the thing you're drawn to, I think, is one of the more important things you can do. I did not set out to write romantic comedies. I have a very optimistic view of the world, and I write pretty dark stuff sometimes. But the romantic comedies come out of me in a way that is not in any way effortless, but certainly it feels like a good task.
Check out Zac Hug's romantic comedy class at the University of British Columbia, where he teaches writing.
The class is online. Anyone can take it. You just sign up for it. There's no credit for it. And it's really fun and really community-based. So enjoy yourselves.
Zac, thanks for talking to me about writing Hallmark movies and sharing your story. I appreciate your time. After the break, has modern dating doomed us? Are young adults dealing with a lot of you-know-what when it comes to dating? Swiping left, swiping right. Or is modern dating not as bad as people say? Has dating just shifted in strange ways? If you know young people on the dating scene, there may be hope for them after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Broadcasting intimate details and useless information from an undisclosed location in New York City. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Is modern dating broken? Or is it just that young adults are stuck in an endless loop of swiping, ghosting, and overanalyzing text messages? For those of you in the dating pool, fear not. A new study says dating isn't doomed after all. It's maybe just taking some weird detours. I'm here with someone who worked on that research. His name is Dr. Brian Ogolsky. He's a professor of human development and family studies at University of Illinois. Brian, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So there's a popular narrative. I hear people complaining on social media, on TV, that dating is broken these days. What made you decide to look at this question in a serious way?
That's a great question. And frankly, when you work in a discipline like I do, where people are constantly saying, hey, tell us some more things about dating, even though I'm a middle-aged man at this point, I sort of say, all right, well, let's ask some people what's going on. And so we have a wonderful group of college students all around us who are dating every minute of every day. So we figured let's ask them directly.
It sounds like a bunch of loud people with microphones, myself included maybe, are the ones screaming that dating is broken. But when you actually talk to the everyday people, young people especially, what do they say when you end up surveying them about this?
Yeah, so that's the interesting sort of take-home message from this work is we asked people, so the first time we did this work was 2012, which feels like ancient history at this point. A decade later, we asked the current college students on our campus the same set of questions. Obviously, in the last decade, a few things like, say, iPhones in everyone's hands have emerged, dating culture via, mediated technologies, things of that nature. So there's been a lot in society that's changed. So sort of our tacit hypothesis was norms of dating are probably a little different than they were 10 years ago. But when we got right down to it, the story that these students were telling us was really a story that sounded remarkably similar across the decade.
But technology clearly must have made some changes. For example, I met my girlfriend in 2012 on Tinder. This is something that never would have happened in the past. There must be some weird changes that have gone on.
Right. So what they're actually doing is one thing. The questions we were asking is, how do you view the dating world? What are the phases that people typically engage in? And so what's interesting about that is absolutely, I'm not here to say cell phones haven't changed everything about the way we live our lives, because I'd be a fool to say that. And there is evidence that technology matters in the dating realm sort of writ large. But when we hear what are the things that make a dating relationship from the earliest glimpse of the other person across the bar all the way until whatever the end might be, students on our campus in particular are not talking about the mechanisms or the mechanics of how they do it. It's simply, I'm doing these things that might be on a phone, might be in real life, might be some other way. And the narrative and the trajectory looks very much the same. So they just really don't talk about the mechanics, which I find quite fascinating.
Interesting. So you're saying despite apps and whatnot of modern technology changing things, these stages on an individual level, when two people are courting, whatever, these stages look kind of the same they did 10 years ago.
Yep, you got it. I mean, that's what they're saying for the most part.
Reading a summary of your paper, the word flirtationship came up. Is that the first stage when you start flirting with someone? And if so, how is it different now than it was then?
Yeah, so that was a word we like to come up with some fun ways of talking about our research. And there was this kind of hybrid thing that students were talking about. And it was much the same again, which is they don't want to call these early stages relationships. There's some flirting going on. There's some gray area. And so that's really what they're talking about in this initial, I see you, I know you're there, you're interesting to me, but we're not defining ourselves. This is not a relationship. We're not quite sure what this is yet, but there's something there.
So 20 years ago, it might have been a subtle smile and flirty jokes in person. Now it's like a winky face emoji, but that stage is still the same.
Yeah, you got it. You got it.
I'm amazing at flirting, as you can tell. Are people still sending winky faces? That I don't know. Did this surprise you that when you actually look on the individual level, things are kind of the same way they used to be?
Absolutely. And really our hypothesis going in was that there was going to be some fairly clear differences when the way we started this interview. This was in the New York Times, this idea of dating is broken is broadcast, as sort of this clickbait. And truly that is not the way people are viewing these things. We did see some differences over the 10 years, but it's really in some of the sort of the pragmatic things people are doing, but the arc of the relationship looked much the same, which is a much more positive narrative to hear.
Then why the disconnect? Why are we hearing things from media outlets, from interviewers, from people with microphones, television programs, whatever? Why are we hearing that it's broken when the mechanics, or as you say, the arc of it is very much not? Is it because people are making a commentary on the technology, or because they actually know what dating is like these days?
So I do think there is a piece of the latter going on here, which is, it makes me think of, when your parent says, do as I say, not as I do. And this is their prototypes or their, what they think the normal relationship is and the way it should go may be at odds with what any one of these particular people are actually experiencing in the day-to-day. And maybe they find their own trajectory is wrong, or maybe they think it's unusual, or maybe they don't, but there's still this idea that the arc of a relationship looks this way. It's looked that way 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We also know that social norms and scripts are very hard to break. So it's also possible this is just so deeply ingrained in Western culture that this is the arc, that's what the narrative is in their minds.
Did you look into how technology has enabled people across different social circles that maybe would have never met to connect? And is that one way in which technology has changed dating?
So we didn't do that here because this was a truly ground up. We said, you tell us. But there is quite a large body of literature about sort of the pool is too large problem is the way I think about that. So, if 30, 40, 50 years ago it was, here's my neighbor and about 10 other people that I know, here's my pool or my roommates, and now it's 75 different apps on my phone and I may still not be satisfied because there might be other places to go. That narrative does show up in other empirical literature as a legitimate problem that's single space.
But students you surveyed didn't speak of this problem. They were mostly just talking about how they dated on an individual level.
That is correct. Yep.
Interesting. I wonder if that problem's as bad as people complain it is.
Yeah. And again, that's beyond the scope kind of what we studied here. But it is certainly something that others in this realm have been talking about.
Given that the phases of relationships you're observing hasn't changed much, do you think traditional structures like marriage are going to continue to be the norm? Do you think we're witnessing any change in the way relationships are structured, or maybe less than you'd think?
That's a great question. And that's one of our sort of take-home messages of this study. So one of the differences that we did see across the 10 years was 10 years ago, this last kind of stage, people were really talking about, I'm going to probably marry this person. Maybe I'm engaged. So it's kind of like marriage, or maybe we're breaking up. And in the most recent data, marriage came up very infrequently. It was a thing that maybe some people thought some people did, but there was talk of moving in together. There was talk of lifelong commitment. There was talk of just doing relationships in more diverse ways than we saw 10 years ago. So I think absolutely, and the demographic data will tell us that people on average are marrying later than they used to. Some people reject the institution of marriage. So we are seeing diverse ways of doing relationships that may or may not be contingent on eventually marrying.
Well, thanks for going over your study. It was interesting. My big takeaway is that my secret way of flirting, sending a winking emoji, is 100% effective. Your words, not mine. But Brian, thanks for taking the time to go over this with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Brian Ogolsky is a professor of human development and family studies at the University of Illinois. That's the show. Thanks for listening to it. Check us out online at www.lastshow.pizza. That's .pizza, not .com. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show. See you tomorrow.